Merry Christmas. It's still Christmas, you know, saints, until tomorrow. So we can still hear and tell the old lovely Christmas stories once more. On Christmas Eve, we hear the story told by Luke of an inn where there was no room, the shepherds, the angel choirs, and a baby born in a manger. It's a Christmas story of light and life. Then on the first Sunday of Christmas, we hear the story told by John about the eternal Word of God, the Son of God, who was with God in the beginning, who was eternally begotten but born in time. It is a Christmas story about grace and truth. Then, if we had observed the Feast of Epiphany this year, we would have told the story told by Matthew of the wise men and the star and gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And this Christmas story is a story of kingship and gift and joy. You know these Christmas stories. And now, on the second Sunday of Christmas, we see that the Christmas story continues. In fact, the story of the birth and infancy of Jesus continues for about a year and a half to 2 years until Jesus and his family resettle back in Nazareth, as we had heard. But this Christmas story, which continues in Matthew, is unlike all of the other Christmas stories, and it is decidedly less happy, let's say. This is a story of running and hiding, of angels and dreams, and it moves from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, to Egypt, and then finally to Nazareth and safety, but not before it turns to themes of confusion, worry, even terror. Then and only then can we say that the Christmas story is over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As we shall see, the last few chapters of the Christmas story actually start when the wise men go to see King Herod. So rewind a few verses to set the stage. We know the story of the wise men and King Herod, but we don't dwell on Herod, do we? And his schemes. We make note of them year by year, but that's really all. Herod was the king. That's all I need to know. After all, we are usually sprinting to Bethlehem, to the manger, to see this thing which the Lord has made known to us. But if we gloss over the wise men, if we gloss over King Herod in favor of the wise men, we will miss an important, if very uncomfortable, steps in the story. Remember that the wise men who had come from the east had arrived in Jerusalem, and they were asking all around to anybody who would say, "Where is the child who was born the King of the Jews?" And you can imagine the scene, even if it's not written. You can imagine the scene. Hi, we're the wise men, the magi, right? We're from the east. We're looking for the King of the Jews. Could you please tell us where he lives? And this hypothetical man would say, yeah, sure, that'd be King Herod. He lives over there in a palace. And look, let's say he's not overly pleasant to be around, if you get my message and my meaning. But the wise men are not deterred. They say, no, not Herod. We're looking for the newborn King of the Jews. We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him. And now this hypothetical character said, look, wise men, I don't care who the king is. What difference does it make to me? Right? That's not in the story. I just want you to know. But it could be. Well, King Herod soon got wind of that, as the story goes, and he was terrified and enraged. We know from other ancient writings that King Herod was a jealous and paranoid king. He had his own wife executed, later his mother-in-law, and finally 2 of his sons, because he was paranoid and insecure and altogether evil. Kings should rule for the people, not for themselves. King Herod was bloodthirsty and insane. And then along comes a baby boy that foreigners, wise men from the east, call the newborn King of the Jews. They give him homage. They give him gifts, this baby, who from the ancient texts would be the Messiah to rule with love and mercy, right? But King Herod would have no other kings with which to compete. He asked all of his priests and chief priests and scribes where this Messiah, this newborn king, would be born. And they all answered, in Bethlehem, duh. That's also not in the actual text. In Bethlehem, everybody knows that. Herod responded, in our Bethlehem? That's only 6 miles away. So Herod secretly sent for the wise men and asked them exactly when the star had arisen. And then he said, that is Herod, he said to the wise men, here I'm, as always, paraphrasing, Herod said, listen, you go ahead and search carefully for the child, and then when you find him, send word, and you know what, I will also go, and give him homage and whatnot. So the wise men said, sure, we'll get right on that. And the wise men, well, you know this part. The wise men did go to Bethlehem, and they found the baby Jesus, and they knelt down and paid him homage, honor, reverence, praise, and the aforementioned gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The end, right? Except for it wasn't the end. The sneaky but smart, wise men, they were wise after all, they left for their own country by another road. And Herod was enraged. Don't you just love Christmas stories? What happened next, you might not know because we never talk about it in church. By a show of hands, I wonder how many of you know the story of the so-called Holy Innocents? Anybody? A couple of you? A couple of you? That's what they're called. The Holy Innocents, those who are innocent. The Holy Innocents. There's a feast to commemorate them, but it's on December 27th, I think, and nobody comes to church 2 days after Christmas to hear the story about Herod and the little baby boys. But it's there. It's in the Bible. Many people forget that part of the Christmas story. And who could blame them? Who wants to hear about that nightmare? It's so bad that we skip it every year. Did you notice that? Look at the verses for today. We're in Matthew chapter 2. We started our reading for today with verse 13 to 15. And then we skipped 3 verses 16 to 18. And then we picked back up on verse 19 until the end, verse 23. Did you catch that along the way? I know you did. On Friday, we talked about it. It's important. We never talk about it. There's only 3 verses, but it's so bad that we skip it every year. To pick up the story, after the wise men left, and presumably the shepherds and the angel choirs, presumably Joseph and Mary and the baby Jesus were still in the barn, and then just when all of the hubbub dies down, right then, while maybe Joseph was counting the gold coins or wondering what to do with all this myrrh, just then, an angel made his next appearance to Joseph in a dream. The angel said, "Get up and take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt and remained there. But meanwhile, back in Bethlehem, when Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all of the baby boys in Bethlehem and in the vicinity who were 2 years and younger. That's the hardest part of the Christmas story by far. And we never talk about it. And then, not more than 2 years later, the angel told Joseph that it was safe to return to Nazareth because Herod had finally died. And they get home. And then finally, that is the end of the Christmas story. So, why is it important to chase the story all the way to the end, including the hard parts? Why can't we just have the soft parts of the story? I think for at least a few reasons. I think because the Holy Innocents, those children, need to be remembered. Saints, in the Christmas season, they were sacrificed by an insane, false king trying to stay in power at all costs. Some people call them the first martyrs, with apologies to St. Stephen. It matters. And because it matters also, who we say is our true king. Remember when I was making up that character, talking to the wise men, I asked a rhetorical question of him. Look, wise men, I don't care who the king is. What difference does it make to me who sits in a palace, whether it's King Herod or a baby in a manger? What difference does it make? See, Christmas is about our newborn king. And so the question pertains to us and to all who would call themselves subject of our king. What difference does it make who the king is? As the Christmas cards say, wise men still seek him, yes, but powerful men still want to kill him and his memory, or worse, to distort his mission, what he lived and died for. Our king lived and died and rose again for love, not for power or violence, but for mercy and justice. What about the subjects of the king? Do we care? Do we care who is king? Do we live like Jesus is our king? Or do we live like we couldn't care less who's in power? For my part, I will have no other king. And I hope you will too. And all so that you can live and love forever. That is the greatest story ever told. That is the Christmas story in its fullness. So, Merry Christmas, saints, until next Christmas. Amen.